When my parents both had cancer, I knew that we needed the tools, we needed the weapons to go up and fight this battle. And the weapons were going to be drugs because there were no drugs. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of, we were just starting to understand the importance of doing research.
Welcome to Believe in Progress, the American Association for Cancer Research Foundation podcast. Join us and be inspired by the incredible stories of those who have faced cancer with strength and resilience, and the medical professionals who are working tirelessly to find new treatments and ultimately a cure. Believe in Progress isn't just about the science of cancer. It's about the human side of this disease. Together, we can make progress in the fight against cancer and bring hope to those who need it most. Welcome to the Believe in Progress podcast presented by the AACR Foundation. I'm your host, Mitch Stoller, the Chief Philanthropic Officer at the AACR. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Patricia LoRusso, a luminary in the field of medical oncology and drug development. Dr. LoRusso serves as the Associate Director of Experimental Therapeutics at Yale Cancer Center and is the AACR President-elect. She has been instrumental in pioneering groundbreaking clinical trials in cancer drug developments, bringing hope and new solutions to countless patients. Today, we will explore her remarkable journey, her contributions to cancer research, and her vision for the future of oncology. As the Associate Director of Experimental Therapeutics at Yale Cancer Center, Dr. LoRusso is a nationally recognized expert in developing new cancer drugs through clinical trials. Dr. LoRusso has pioneered significant advances in medical oncology, drug development, and early-phase clinical trials for her work at Wayne State University's Barbara Karmanos Cancer Institute as director of both the Phase 1 clinical trials program and of the Eisenberg Center for Experimental Therapeutics. Dr. LoRusso joined the AACR in 1988, served on the board of directors from 2015 to 2018, and received the prestigious AACR Joseph H. Berknall Award for Outstanding Achievement in Clinical Cancer Research in 2022. She currently serves with distinction as chair of the AACR Exploratory IND Biomarker-Driven Clinical Trials Task Force, chair of the AACR Margaret Foti Award for Leadership and Extraordinary Achievements in Cancer Research Award Committee, and co-chair of the AACR Precision Combination Therapy Task Force. She's been a member of the AACR Project Genie External Advisory Board since its inception in 2015. Dr. LoRusso, Pat, welcome to Believe in Progress. So happy and thrilled to have you here for this episode.
Thank you so very much, Mitch. I'm honored to be here.
Well, thanks. And before we really kind of get into it, I have to ask you this question. As a native person from Detroit, Michigan, are we rooting for the Detroit Lions?
You better believe it. It's been many, many decades, but we finally made it to the playoffs again.
So
my heart has always been with the Lions.
I was going to say, did you grow up like, your family and Detroit Lions fans?
Yes. In fact, my son lives in the city proper now and just had a little baby about 4 weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
And during the last two games, his little boy was in his Lions onesie and they were in their Lions clothes. And I got to tell you, the city has been gentrified quite a bit and has come along quite a bit in the last 6-7 years. But this has really ignited a lot of positive enthusiasm. This is something the city really needed.
I think I told you once that, the Stoller family hailed from Southfield, Michigan. And so my dad and his uncles and my grandfather were from Detroit. And then I guess when my grandfather finally moved to Washington, D.C., but one of my first trips ever was to go to Detroit, Michigan. And so I've always had a fondness for the city. And I'm really thrilled for the Lions, too. I hope they can pull it off.
Oh, I think they're each of those team players. They have unified as one.
Yeah.
They have a really special coach this year.
Dan Campbell's great.
If you even look at the quarterback and where he's been and where he's come, it's been a huge transformation. That whole team is gelled.
It's great. Yes. They're really, what do they call it?
Detroit's a special place. People don't understand the uniqueness and how special the city of Detroit is. I miss it.
They call it the grit of the city, or some true grit, or something of like that. But it's fantastic. Pat, tell us a little bit about your journey. Why you chose cancer, why you chose the field of cancer oncology, and what was what sparked your interest in this?
Yeah. So when I was a child, when I was growing up, I've always loved animals, and I thought, wow, I'm going to become a vet when I grow up. I grew up in the inner city of Detroit, and so I went to Detroit public schools. I didn't have, an Ivy League background by any means, or a private prep school background by any means before college. I went to a small Catholic college in the city of Detroit called Marygrove College. I think there were about 800 students, both full and part-time, when I was going there. Very small school affiliated with the University of Detroit. And I graduated from Marygrove, and then I subsequently went on to Michigan State's DO, or osteopathic medical school. But when I was growing up as a child, as I said, I grew up in the inner city. I went to Detroit public schools. And when I was young, when I was a child, both of my parents, first my mother and then my father, ended up dying of cancer. And it was back then, we didn't have a lot of the treatments that we have.
Mm-hmm.
We also, unfortunately, didn't have the supportive care that we have. My father was a laborer. My mother didn't work. She was a housewife. She was born and raised in Italy and moved here as a late teenager, early 20s. Was introduced to my dad. So they didn't have a lot in terms of resources. We had 4 children, and a couple cousins ended up living with us for a while when their mom died.
How old were you at this time?
When my mother died, I was a teenager. I was about 13.
Okay.
And then my father died a few years later. And when your parents die from a disease like that, when you're young, it's sometimes very hard to remember what they looked like when they were healthy. And it doesn't only it leaves a huge void in your life. I could probably, I'm not only saying that for myself, but I'm saying that for many, many people who've lost their parents when they were children, because nobody replaces your parents usually. I mean, if my parents didn't have an educational background, but they, I would say, had their PhD in how to love and how to raise a family and how to give to their children. And so it was a huge, huge void for me. We didn't have a lot of resources, so it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing in terms of when my mom died, and my father struggled. And then subsequently, when he died, it just, your life is never the same.
Right.
Obviously, it was a negative, but the one thing it did bring into my life was focus and drive, and I knew what I wanted to do. I had identified my enemy very, very young. People don't take care of you like your parents do. And so I knew that I was out to destroy my enemy. And for me, the way I could do that was to go into medicine and take care of cancer patients. When I was in high school, again, in the Detroit public school system, I remember vividly talking to my counselor and telling him what I wanted to do. And he, at that time, it was many years ago, because I'm in my 60s. My counselor said, girls don't become doctors, they become nurses. And unfortunately, one day that counselor ended up being one of my patients with advanced metastatic prostate cancer.
Huh.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a journey, but it taught me how to focus. I ended up going to Marygrove College. It was free for me. I didn't have a lot of money going to school. Going to a small school like that, where there's only a handful of people who major in science, getting into elite medical schools was not necessarily easy. I didn't succeed, but I immediately went into medical school from undergrad. I went to the osteopathic medical school at Michigan State. When I was an undergrad at Marygrove, although it was small, it was run by IHM nuns. And I got to know Sister Maher, Veronica Maher, who was at the Michigan Cancer Foundation, but she was an IHM. I started working in her lab down in the Michigan Cancer Foundation. She and Father Justin McCormick ran a carcinogenesis lab. And they went up to Michigan State before I graduated from undergrad. And I kind of knew that they were there and followed them and was able to get in there. Sometimes it's not necessarily about where you go to school. It's how you learn in that environment and what you learn. A lot of it is driven by your self-drive. And so I went up there to the DO school. There were very few medicine residency programs for DOs. So I did go to Riverside Osteopathic Hospital and did my internal medicine residency. Very, very small program. Couldn't necessarily get into a lot of MD fellowships in oncology. There were no DO fellowships in oncology. At that time, most DOs, there weren't many specialists. We were primarily primary care docs. But I did get into Wayne State University, and Dr. Baker, who was a DO, was there at the time. And I must tell you that I was able to get what I consider some of the best training I could have ever gotten as a fellow for what I wanted to do. My passion was drug development. So I was able to work with Tom Corbett, who, created many of the syngeneic models that many people still use in 2024. And Dr. Rick Pazder was the fellowship director, and he now runs the Oncology Center of Excellence at the FDA.
Yeah.
So I had the basic and I had the clinical in terms of drug development. You couldn't ask for better mentors.
How did you know you wanted to do drug development?
When my parents both had cancer, my mother was treated with nitrogen mustard. It was the only thing we had at the time. I remember how god awfully sick she got and how it didn't work at all. It was pretty brutal. And my father subsequently died a few years later of lung cancer. We didn't have any drugs for lung cancer.
Right.
He bled out. It hit an artery and he bled out. I knew that we needed the tools. We needed the weapons to go up and fight this battle. And the weapons were going to be drugs because there were no drugs. We didn't understand the biology of the disease like we subsequently do even now. We hadn't even cloned the human genome yet. And so cancer, a lot of people shied away from it. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of, we were just starting to understand the importance of doing research. And for a while there weren't great resources. It wasn't until President Nixon signed the National Cancer Act, I believe in 1971.
Right.
So these were the years that I was starting to advance into undergrad and medical school.
I see.
There wasn't a lot back then. And we didn't, he wanted to fight the war on cancer. He thought he was going to end it, in 5 years. We didn't understand cancer. We understand it a lot better now. There's still a lot of components that we still don't. But I knew that the only way you could fight this enemy was to have drugs. And I fell in love with drug development with these two mentors. So I realized how important it was. And I've been doing it ever since. Many of my colleagues have become CMOs of big pharma, have become cancer center directors. I'm kind of like in the trenches still doing clinical trials. I love clinical research.
So you had a number of mentors along the way. Did you have mentors though at Marygrove, and was the nun and the father your mentors at the time?
Well, they were my lab mentors because I started working with them at the end of my sophomore year. I would drive down they were at Michigan Cancer Foundation at Wayne State University, and they welcomed me into their lab, and they actually gave me a stipend to work there, which was just very, very generous of them. I was kind of like a lab jockey, but they gave me little individual projects to make me feel like I was doing something in terms of research and also to help me understand it and fall in love with it. And so from a lab perspective, they were my mentors, but Mary Grove was a really, really special place. It was what I needed at the time. Um, everybody has certain needs at certain points in their career, and there was an element of nurturing there that I think really I needed it at that time after having been through everything that I had been through. And I had mentors there as well. They were in theology because I did a lot of work in theology. It was one of my majors. And in the sciences, the IHMs that were teaching biology and chemistry took me under their wings. And Dr. Fleming, who was Sister Suzanne Fleming, knew a lot of people in research at the time because of her training in chemistry, and really helped foster the hands-on needs that I needed to be excited about what I was going to do. Not everybody gets that opportunity.
But made a big difference in your life
Oh
and your
yeah, huge
trajectory, right?
difference.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be where I was today if I hadn't been in the situations that I had been in throughout those years.
Early in my career, it was my first executive director job with the National Sudden Infant Death Syndrome Foundation. The assistant executive director was Sister Edith McShane, and she was a delight, and she had such an impact on my life. I didn't realize it, at the time, Pat, but I learned so many lessons from her. And I'm a good Jewish boy, and she was a great sister. And she once brought me back a present from the Vatican, and it was, my Hebrew name is Moishe, Moses, and she brought me back a little symbol from the Vatican of Moses, and I have it. It's in the house right now. But I hear what you're saying about mentors and what they can do for the trajectory of your life and how you move forward like that. So very special.
Yeah, that one person that just is in your life and can touch your life to make you want to work harder, study more, just be something that they can be proud of as mentors.
So Pat, then was Wayne State your first, the first job, the first big opportunity for you?
Yeah, so back in those days we didn't have computers like we do now, and so to apply for medical school, to apply for fellowships, it was all applications that you sent in the mail. And I remember applying for fellowships, and I only knew Detroit and I didn't have a lot of resources. So it wasn't like I could journey to the West Coast of the country or anything. I would send in my applications on a weekend, and by Friday I would get my rejections. And the only fellowship that I was able to get at the time, which ended up, it was God's blessing because I would never have had those mentors. Having Rick Pazder, the way he thought about drug development,
Right.
and Tom Corbett, it was a blessing that was the fellowship that I got into, because it was the experience that shaped the rest of my academic career.
And did you focus on clinical trials there, like early phase clinical trials? Was that
Yeah,
the beginning of
so
learning about that?
Rick Pazder had come. He was doing GI oncology, but he was also doing phase 1 clinical trials. And as a fellow, you don't need, you need to just have hands-on with few trials, not tons of trials. So he was doing, clinical trials. We were writing investigator-initiated trials based on concepts. But Tom Corbett in the lab was developing drugs. We had a program project grant with Warner Lambert at the time. And also we were doing projects with other companies like Sanofi Aventis, and also working on projects with the NCI. So things like working on formulation of Taxol as an NCI project, and working on first generation MEK inhibitors, and other drugs like pyrazoloacridine analogs and oxaliplatin with Sanofi Aventis. Tom would do most of the in vitro work, and I worked with him and ran huge in vivo experiments with looking at efficacy in vivo model systems. I mean, sometimes we were running I was running 400 mice at a time. I mean, it was huge, the number of experiments that we were doing. And he wouldn't give me a technician to help me because he said, you can't have a technician until you can teach a technician everything a technician needs to know. Mm. And so I worked in the lab. I remember as a first year and second year attending, I think I went 590 some days without a day off. Because I had to inject my animals 7 days a week.
Right.
And sometimes they were twice daily injections. So, yeah, it was quite an experience, but it was definitely something that really taught me more than you can imagine.
And in that laboratory at Wayne State, were there were there breakthroughs that came through from that area?
Well, oxaliplatin was one of the drugs we worked on in collaboration with Sanofi Aventis.
Translate that for the lay public. What?
Yeah, oxaliplatin is actually a platinum analog. It was found by Rosenberg, I believe it was Rosenberg up at Michigan State several years before, that cisplatinum was a drug that had anti-cancer activity.
Right.
And so cisplatinum was a difficult drug. It was a heavy metal. And, we had to learn, the people that were doing the early phase trials, and Wayne State was part of that, had to learn how to overcome the toxicities and how to give additional medication to prevent some of the toxicities. But it was a drug that was identified as active, and it's still used today. I mean, I remember one of my instructors at Wayne State, when I was a fellow, telling me when he gave the first testicular cancer patient who was in the ICU cisplatinum, and he walked out a week later and he responded for 6 months. And he was literally dying of his cancer, a young man with testicular cancer. So we knew that platinums were active. Cisplatin was active, but it was pretty toxic.
Right.
Caused a lot of kidney damage, caused a lot of neurotoxicity, peripheral neurotoxicity. And so they looked at alternative platinum analogs to see if they were active. Carboplatinum came from that. But neither of those really had any activity in tumor types like colorectal cancer. And so we were trying to work with Sanofi to identify activity of alternative platinum analogs in tumors where the current platinum compounds did not have significant activity, like colorectal cancer. And I remember colorectal cancer models, colon 38, and pancreatic cancer models in animals and mice, just their tumors just melting away with that drug.
Wow.
And it subsequently went into clinic, phase 2 trials, phase 3 trials, FDA approval. And to this day, 2024, oxaliplatin is one of the most commonly used drugs in the treatment of colon and pancreatic cancer in the world.
Wow. That's amazing. Pat, take us from Wayne State to Yale. What was the big move, but probably great opportunity for you? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I was at Wayne State for many, many years. I trained at Wayne State, and I was there for well over 23, 24 years. I built their phase 1 program. It was essentially nothing when I started. I built it into one of the biggest academic early phase clinical trials programs in the country. We were putting, at the time that I left, several hundred patients a year on early phase clinical trials. In that program, we probably worked on, at least 15, 20 drugs that subsequently went on to become FDA approved. And it wasn't only anti-cancer drugs. I also worked on some drugs like OxyContin, fentanyl. These are supportive care drugs for pain management. Drugs like Zometa, where we had to identify a dose and a schedule for sustainability. These drugs like Zometa are used in the treatment of bone metastasis, not necessarily treating the cancer, but preventing bone injury in patients that have cancer in their bones from various tumors, myeloma, breast cancer, prostate cancer, etc. But the opportunity came to build and I had built that program, and it was an outstanding place. We, I believe, had one of the best programs academically in the country. And I was asked to come to Yale to help them build a program and to hopefully work with many of their scientists to bring some of their basic science ideas and drugs that they were developing in the lab into the clinic. And so I moved to Yale about 9 years ago. It'll be 10 years in August. And I've been there ever since. I came as one of their associate center directors, and we have phenomenal fellows. I work with them on a regular basis, junior faculty, and we're really starting to really build the program. COVID set us back quite a bit,
Right.
but we're still on a positive upward trajectory.
And you've been a member of AACR since 1988. How has AACR influenced your life and influenced your career?
AACR was extremely instrumental in launching my career, and not only in launching it, but allowing it to continue to grow in a positive way. The beauty of AACR is not only the education that you get at the annual meetings, it's the people that you meet at the meetings, but it's the opportunities for leadership. It's the opportunities for interactions, and it's the opportunities to work on projects that will help advance cancer in many, many different ways, because there's a lot of different facets to AACR. It was always known for its basic science focus,
right.
But as oncology has transformed, as we have come to understand more and more the biology of the disease, we have recognized more and more how to take that basic science and transform it into clinical applicability, and how important it is for the clinicians in the clinic to take what they've gotten from the basic scientists and give back to them to help the basic science grow, as well as then obviously the clinic grow. And so I've found that AACR has been it was transformative for my career. It was not only focusing, I was a clinician, but it helped me better understand the importance and the needs for basic and translational science.
So you've seen it change a lot since 1988. We have 58,000 members today, and you were so pleased and happy. You're the president-elect of AACR, and come April 7th or 8th, you'll become the president of AACR. What's your vision? What's your vision for the future, for your couple years as being president-elect and past president and president?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I kind of look at being the president, getting nominated for this position, and then getting elected into this position.
Yes.
It's almost like a miracle. I mean, who would have thought that this kid that grew up in the inner city of Detroit, went to a small, 800 student, primarily religious focused undergrad, would grow up and become honored by her colleagues, who not only nominated, but also voted for me to be the president of the largest, and I consider the most prestigious, oncology organization in the world. When I started in AACR, there were clinicians, but most of the clinicians were not really just clinicians. They were focused on translational medicine. Many of them were lab focused that also did a little bit of clinical medicine because they had trained. And clinical trials was not really a focus in 1988 as it is now, for many reasons. Number one, clinical research has really transformed over the last several decades. We didn't have as much science going into the clinic, trying to understand the science like we do today. But also, Now in 2024, there are so many clinicians that are part of AACR that understand the importance of trying to understand the biology of the disease, the many facets of the disease, working collaboratively with the basic scientists to take their ideas, bring them into the clinic, and then bring those ideas, bring specimens that have been obtained from the patients back into the clinic to help us understand the translation of science in the lab into the clinic and back again. In fact, everybody has a vision statement or a thematics when they become president of the organization that they use for their annual meeting. And my thematics is going to be, from, the cancer research continuum, from bench to bedside to bench, because that's what it's all about. And no longer can we just have basic science. We can cure millions of mice. We've cured millions of mice. But the real challenge is to cure patients. And I think that the membership is so encompassing of what is needed that hopefully working together one day, we've cured some cancers. We've made huge progress with some, but there's a lot more work out there that we need to do. And together, working with a membership like AACR, the components are there. The soldiers are there fighting the battle. We just have to focus, come together, and fight this battle together. And I think one day we're going to see amazing progress in the next decade. And hopefully I'll be still alive to be able to see some of it.
I hope so.
But my vision for AACR is trying to bring that gap together. It's not only about clinic. It's not only about basic science. I mean, I am only a clinician. I do not have a lab. I work with scientists. And to think that a clinician was voted by peers around the world to spearhead or to take the helm of this organization, albeit for only a year, to me, I think speaks of where we're going as a community of, as an army of soldiers.
Pat, you once said to me that the patients are what drive you, and they give you lots of reinforcement and inspire you. I know your mom and dad were the catalyst and inspiration, but talk a little bit about the patients, because you deal with patients quite a lot.
I deal with patients, yes, all the time, because I'm still actively involved. I still have 2 clinics a week, and I still see a lot of patients. The patients that I see, I do clinical research, but I do early phase or phase 1 clinical trials. I don't treat patients with standard of care unless those drugs are within the context of an investigational clinical trial. So all of my patients have advanced metastatic disease. The vast majority of my patients will die from their disease because of their diagnosis, and we still haven't cured a lot of these cancers. But, when you go into a patient's room, what you realize first and foremost is that there's a person sitting on that examining table, sitting in that chair. There's a frightened human being that's there and willing to sacrifice their time to go on to what precious time they have left to go on to a clinical trial because they want to live. And they're giving up so much of their life that's left, that's remaining, because they want to live. They want to live because they have children. They want to live because they have a spouse. They want to live because they have parents. They want to live because they've had good lives. And you're sitting there with them, and they're literally, and ultimately what they're thinking. And it's got to be extremely frightening the first time somebody's been put on an early phase clinical trial. But they give you the stimulus to keep moving, because you realize when you're looking them in the face and talking to them and just being with them and treating them, that there's so much we have to do, and there's so much they need us to do. And they've been a nidus all my life, my academic life, because I look these patients in the eye, for the last 30 years of my career, plus when I was in training. They make me realize that we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
they are my heroes because of what they have to do to help us develop the next generation of cancer agents.
And could you just chat a little bit about an exciting initiative that you're helping us, you're leading with some of our members here at AACR, the clinical trial program that we're trying to get launched this year?
Yeah, so we're working on a clinical trial. There's a disease there's a cancer. It's called gastroesophageal junction. There's a cancer that occurs in the gastroesophageal junction. It's at the intersection. It's where the esophagus and the stomach come together. And unfortunately, unlike many other organs, the esophagus doesn't have a lining around it like many of the other organs do. And so when you develop cancer within the esophagus, first of all, it obstructs the ability of the food to go down into the stomach and you can't eat. But also, many times patients who get esophageal cancer either have metastasis at diagnosis or soon metastasize, which means that the tumor leaves the esophagus, goes into the lymph nodes, goes into the liver, goes into the lungs. And the only chance of cure people with gastroesophageal junction cancer have right now is surgery and chemotherapy plus or minus radiation therapy. But anybody that's been through that treatment and that surgery, there's a lot of what we call comorbidities, problems that arise as a result of what they've had to have done, and their life is never the same. And so there have been some really great drugs that have recently been FDA approved or hopefully will be FDA approved, predicated on the outcomes of the phase 3 trials that are being done with those drugs in esophageal cancer, gastroesophageal cancer. And so one of our, hopefully, God willing, with resources, et cetera, that we still need, we can hopefully treat these patients much earlier before they even go to surgery in a scenario or a situation that we call neoadjuvant treatment, before surgery. And hopefully we can shrink this tumor with these drugs and catch the tumor earlier. And with some of these really good drugs, we're hoping that we'll be able to eradicate the tumor with this neoadjuvant treatment. And hopefully, maybe one day, if this trial proves itself and we identify the right patients, we may be able to hopefully prevent many patients from going through that horrible surgery. And we would hope that one day, with information that we learn in this trial and maybe within this trial itself, we may even be able to cure a subset of patients. Knowing that the outcome is dismal, if we can even cure 20 or 30% or prevent them from having to go to surgery, we will have done a lot.
Be a big deal.
So we're teaming up with many experts in this area around North America initially, and hopefully gaining the right number of resources that we need to pull this trial off in conjunction with pharmaceutical companies that will hopefully give us the drugs that we need to execute this clinical trial. We will be able to make a difference in these patients' lives.
And as you know, we're working hard to make that happen, and I'm confident that we will make that happen. Pat, I can't thank you enough for all you do for AACR, for cancer patients and families that you've helped and assisted, and for future families that you've helped. You're an inspiring figure for me, and I always enjoy being around you because it makes me feel like my work is so important to be able to support great scientists, doctors like yourself. And on behalf of AACR and all of my colleagues, just want to thank you so much. Really looking forward to you becoming president of AACR here in April. And can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today, and really appreciate everything you do.
Well, I've got to thank you, Mitch, for allowing me affording me the opportunity for this interview. But I really have to thank the AACR. They have grown and expanded, and they really are focusing on the patient through the basic translational and clinical work that their members are actively engaged in. And just the opportunities that they afford junior investigators, senior investigators, and their willingness to expand and try to focus on very important initiatives. It's an organization that I'm proud to be president-elect of. Thank you.
Well, we're really, really proud to have you as that, and look forward to a great couple years. So thank you so much, and we'll be talking to you soon, and hope you have a great night. Once again, thank you to our listeners, supporters, and donors. Remember, your support drives the progress against cancer. Please consider subscribing to our podcast and sharing this episode with a friend, and heading over to our website, aacr.org, to consider making a donation. When you donate to the American Association for Cancer Research, your investment in life-saving research propels the important work of the more than 58,000 members of the AACR in driving progress against cancer. You can support life-saving cancer research with any donation you make today. Thank you for listening to Believe in Progress, the AACR Foundation podcast. This podcast is produced by CollegeCast LLC. Please visit www.collegecastpodcast.com for more information.